Zachary Davanzo was gunned down in his yard in Ladson in August of 2017. Later, one of his landlords allegedly confessed to shooting him 5 times, but no one's being charged with a crime. Officials at the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office say this case is self-defense. I talked one-on-one with Zachary's mother, Andrea Watson, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Andrea Watson, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Oh, you're very welcome. I understand that you are a mother, well, at the time, of 2 children. And one of your children, unfortunately, Zachary Davanzo,
Yeah.
was actually your oldest son. And unfortunately, he was killed in 2018 after some sort of incident at a trailer park in Ladson, which is technically Charleston County, Berkeley County. And I understand that at the time, the landlord confessed to shooting your son 5 times, but no one apparently is being charged with the crime, according to Channel 2. Who are you these days?
Who am I? I am an advocate for injustice. I feel for the people like the recent family that is going through the tragedies that they have gone through of not getting justice, especially in our political atmosphere. But I'm a mother who fights for those that are, can't fight for themselves anymore.
How do you, Ms. Watson, describe justice these days?
Very far in between and few is how I describe it. Not a lot of people get it unless you have a lot of money and political power. It's not an even playing field at all for anybody, and especially those that are low income or a brown and black colored skin. They don't get justice at all, and that is something I'm very passionate about because I can't even imagine. I know what it's like not to have justice and have people look at me and lie and treat me like it's no big deal that my son was murdered. But I know, and I've shared my cover story with other families that have been through the same thing and treated much worse than I. I can't even imagine,
And you obviously talk about being lied to. Let me take you back to 2018 because this is coming from
2017. So we can stop. Yes, it was August 15th, 2017.
August 15th, 2017. How did your day start?
With a phone call. I had worked the night before. I work in a hospital, or I did work in a hospital then, 7P to 7A. And I had worked the night before, and I was sleeping, and I received a call from the Berkeley County coroner asking if my son was Zachary Davanzo and that he was in the morgue. So the first thing, my youngest son was with his dad in Sumter, South Carolina at the time. So the first thing I did was call him, my ex-husband, Zachary's father, and go there to see what we can figure out and see what had happened. I was told that there was an altercation and that it resulted in my son's death.
Watson, let me ask you, why didn't you get this information from the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office first?
That I don't know. I believe that my son had an address for somebody else, and so they went to that address, I guess, looking for the next of kin. So it was my son was killed at 5:30 in the morning, and it was about 11 when I found out what had happened after they got a hold of me. But then the situation, the truth, I did not find out truths of the case until 6 months after the fact because of how the detective and how Dwayne Lewis, the sheriff, worded and tried to make things sound like we're going to investigate this. We're going to get down to the bottom of this. We are going to catch the person that did this and find out what happened. only to find out 6 months later, after the people sold the property and everything, that it was considered a self-defense case, and that Charlotte Wilson's office had claimed it and deemed it non-prosecutable before my son's body even got to the morgue. There's proof of it. There's paperwork. The cops that have wrote the police reports, the autopsy reports, all indicate that there was foul play. But they said because a husband and wife collaborated the story, they weren't going to prosecute it.
Okay. When you spoke with, I guess, a detective or somebody inside the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office, when did they tell you this investigation would take and how long?
In the beginning of the investigation, because I live in Fayetteville, North Carolina,
okay.
I had lots of family and friends that were in Charleston that offered me to come stay there while things were going, and I was like, no, the cops are handling this. They're lining up interviews. They're talking to people. I knew right away that the wife was not the one that shot my son, and I know that to this day. It was the man that shot my son, but because he had felonies, he claimed that the wife had done it, so that he wouldn't get in trouble.
How many felonies did this guy allegedly have?
Several. I don't. He was not a good character at all. He very narcissistic, very abusive. The woman that he is married to, I feel sorry for her. I don't even know if they're still married. He had another woman that he was had in his spell or whatever in this little relationship thing that helped with the kids, I guess, too. And they were all on drugs and different things like that. And I know my son was passionate about the children. He had car seats in his car. He had cookies and crackers in his car because he would take the kids out to the park and he would take the kids to daycare because the parents weren't able to do it or unable to do it, let's say it. And he was really trying to help that family. And the way that they worded it off the thing is that when they called the cops to tell and report that my son was murdered, they said that my son was an intruder that had trespassed, which was not true at all. And the cops believed this up until I had to prove to them that my son lived there. And I'm like, his stuff is there. How his belongings are in the property.
Ms. Watson, let me ask you this. How long prior to your son's death was he actually living at this property in Ladson?
Just for a few months. It wasn't very long. I think he had been, they had been doing music and stuff in the shed and trap music and different things like that since January, I believe, of that year.
And you talked earlier about those interviews. How many interviews did they actually conducted as far as the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office?
They did. Well, see, that's the thing. I don't what upsets me and what aggravates me in the justice system is that they lied to me. Dwayne Lewis, the detective, Charlotte Wilson's office, saying that they had investigated and they had done everything. But there are, in the police report, even in an investigation, there are where it writes that the cops on scene said that there are personnel from Charlotte Wilson's office that said it's non-prosecutable, end the case. Then Brian Knapp, a reporter, and Colette both got a hold of the story.
Right.
And they were like, oh my God, yeah. They are like, yes, you need to, there's a story here. With just the hard evidence, regardless, I am a mourning mother. And yes, I see things through my eyes as a mother who has lost her child, but I also am a healthcare worker. I also believe in science, and I have the reports. And when you look at the autopsy, and when you look at the drug reports, and when you look at the police reports, there is foul play all the way around. You can't sweep my son's murder under a rug and go, oh, it's okay. There are witnesses that heard him scream. The witnesses next door, the neighbors, heard the altercation. They saw a man standing over my son. But all of that doesn't matter because the wife said she shot him and the husband corroborated it, and it's a closed case. Who closed the case and why did they close the case?
Well,
I'm sorry.
Oh, go
My
for it.
thoughts on that is that the gentleman that did kill my son had connections, because he owns the land that my son was murdered on.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, it wasn't until December when I finally was pushing the detective hard, like, hey, where are the interviews? You said you were going to interview this person. You said you were going to go talk to his boss, character reference. Yes, you say this was some kind of drug thing. My son worked for an engineering company for 3 years, never missed a day. He had references. He helped people. He babysat other people's children, not just this people's children. And yet, because of the way he looked and because of their circumstances of they thinking it's not worth investigating, they closed it down.
I have a lot of questions here. First, Ms. Watson, let me ask you this. Okay, what was your son's relationship? I shouldn't say that. What was your son's business relationship with this landlord?
They would make music together, and my son was all about, it was underground music and, screamo, all that great whatever stuff. But it was music, and also, my son liked helping people, and he wanted to do his own songs, and he did have different music things. And it was helping him too. Don't get me wrong. He had gotten into it with another roommate down the road that he thinks, not in a bad way, but they just weren't getting along over a woman. And so he went and stayed with this guy instead, and was like, well, I can help them and do different things there. So that was his relationship. He thought the guy, he looked up to the guy at first in a way, for the music part of it. And then when he found out how he was living and the drugs and the children, my son got sucked into wanting to help him find other routes for the drugs and different things and expand the music as far as the music and not do anything except marijuana.
So, and I'm going to get back to that in just a second too, but let's go back to that date, in 2017 when your son obviously died at, it was 5:30 in the morning, I believe.
Yes,
go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
According to the report, my son had to be at work early that morning because I believe it was a Thursday, something like that. He had took the gentleman that killed him to Dunkin' Donuts there, not in Ladson, but in Somerville, which was the closest Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
There is video. They did get video of them two walking into Dunkin' Donuts. My son paying for donuts for their children and for him and breakfast and stuff, and them leaving Dunkin' Donuts. When they arrived back to the house, moments later, my son was killed. He tried to claim that it was self-defense. He said that my son jumped on top of him and started beating him. But he had 2 guns. Where did the guns come from? He said this in his own statement. This is not even something I said. In his own statement, he said the gentleman, Dwayne, was armed with 2 guns and was unable to discharge any of those. And it was his wife that ran in the house and got another gun, a .22 long gun, shotgun, or a long 22 rifle. That's the word I'm looking for. And shot my son 5 times. Why wrestling with her husband? Come on now. Even saying that doesn't make sense. But then putting it on paper and reading the autopsy, it wasn't the truth. My son was shot at close range, muzzle to skin at some places. And they just, oh, well, that's not evidence. Well, how can you say this woman said she stood across the yard and shot my son when there are 2 spots on my baby where he was shot with the muzzle against his skin? The other one that killed him hit him in his neck, and he bled out.
Oh.
His body was dragged across the yard. A gun was put underneath my son. Tests were done to prove that he didn't have GSR on his hands. The couple had showered, changed their clothes, and cleaned things up before they even called the cops. And nobody finds this funny. Nobody questioned it. They just went with it.
How long after they allegedly killed your son that they called, obviously, the sheriff's office in Berkeley County?
I believe a neighbor had called 911. Like I said, there was a neighbor that heard the ruckus and heard somebody screaming and heard my son call for help.
Wow.
So I believe that there was a call there, but them actually calling, they called, I think it was like 6 something in the morning. So it was enough time that they were, like I said, they had showered, they had changed clothes, they had gotten the kids out of the house. They said that he was a trespasser, and they were trying to make it off as it was somebody, because I guess they didn't realize how close he was to me and his other, his brother and stuff, that we always knew where my Zach was and what he's doing and who he was with and things like that. But I had to prove to them that he lived there.
But let me ask you this, Miss Watson. Was there any video surveillance on that property at all?
No, there was not. Not on the property itself, but there was plenty of witnesses. And there's, in fact, at some point, I'm sure that his own wife will come out against him. And that is what I hold as an hope, because I know that she didn't pull the trigger, but of course she's not going to be prosecuted for it anyways. She's on living her life now. I'm sure she doesn't even think about it because she wasn't even the one that killed my son.
How did this all started? Okay, from the time they left Dunkin' Donuts to the time they got back to the house, what was their communication like, the landlord and your son? Did you get any information about that?
I didn't. I was told it was a setup by some of my son's friends, that what had happened is Dwayne didn't want to stop doing what he was doing with the meth and stuff like that. And Zach was getting tired of it and was trying to help and was threatening that, he wanted to help his wife and the kids get to a better place if Dwayne himself didn't want to do it. And he was afraid. I think he told Zach stuff that he didn't want other people to know. I honestly do. I honestly think. And I don't think that Dwayne did it alone. I don't think his wife had any part of it. I think that it was Dwayne and one of his cousins, because his cousin had just gotten out of jail. My son called me the night before and said he was very concerned and didn't think he could live there anymore because there was some more shady characters showing up. And I said, okay, well, we'll go to work. We'll figure it out. You can come up here. We'll figure something out. I never got to speak to him again.
Did the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office, that is, talk to those cousins?
No. They, again, closed down the investigation before my son's body hit the morgue. I investigated. I hired a PI, premier PI out of the Ladson area, Somerville area. They did an investigation as an ex-FBI agent and a sheriff himself. Right. He said to me, he was personal friends with Dwayne Lewis. He said Dwayne Lewis lied to him to his face about the investigation. He was amazed with it too. But again, Charleston, South Carolina is a good old boy system. It's about who you know, whether you're going to get justice or not. It's not about whether the crime is justifiable or not, unfortunately. And I learned that the hard way. I would stand outside the Berkeley County Sheriff's Department with signs and posters I've made. I've walked down the streets. I've talked to them. The detective that was on my son's case, they reassigned him because I bugged him so much. I would call him constantly. And I finally, in December of 2017, when I finally pressured the man to actually tell me the truth. I'm like, why are you doing this? I'm like, why are you not answering me? Why am I setting up these interviews for friends and different things and family members, and you're not following through, or you're too busy to see these people? Isn't my son a priority? And he finally told me, well, it's a shut and close case. He said, unless somebody confesses to the murder, the case is closed. And I said, so for 6 months, you have been leading me on, telling me that there's an opportunity for my son to get justice and for the truth to come out. But this whole time, it's been a lie.
And Ms. Watson, okay, what else did you hear from that detective and the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office? And what did you actually hear in contrast from Scarlett Wilson's office at the solicitor's office in Charleston County?
Yes. Oh, I went there several times to see Scarlett Wilson, and she refused to see me. She refused to speak with me. She said it was a closed case. She said, and I was like, well, your office is the one that closed it, according to the sheriff's department. Well, of course, the sheriff's department backstepped, even though I have proof written on paper that a police officer from Berkeley County wrote that somebody from the assistant to Charlotte Wilson said it was a closed case before my son's body hit the morgue. She said that is not true. That was a mistake. That was an accident that it was wrote like that. And that any investigations and all that had took place confirmed that it was a self-defense case. And it's not true. It's a husband and wife that said my son was an intruder. That was a lie right off the bat. They washed and changed their clothes before the cops got there. Why would you do that if you are self-defense and you were worried for your life? You're not worried about cleaning any evidence. You're worried about being safe. My son's body was dragged and a gun was put underneath it. Those are just opening starters for the investigation. And it went nowhere because it was a mobile home. He didn't have money and he was only 23 years old. And yes, he smoked marijuana, but people that smoke marijuana doesn't mean they're a bad person or they're out to hurt people.
And
I don't know.
Yeah. And okay, well, let's go back to when your son's body was allegedly dragged and the gun was allegedly put on top of him. Was that stated in the police report?
Yes, but it was his body was dragged and a long gun was laid underneath him. And not on top of him. It was underneath him. His arms were above his body.
Okay.
My son wasn't don't get me wrong, my son wasn't a small person. He was 5'10" and he's 200, 300 pound guy. But he was a teddy bear. He loved people and he wanted to help people. He didn't want to hurt people.
And as a matter of fact, as you mentioned, News 2 presented the discrepancies to the solicitor. Scarlett Wilson said the initial report that her office actually shut down the investigation is an error, as she told you. And she added that her office doesn't have that power. She concluded
that's a lie. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, sir, but that is a lie. Even with the Sutherland case, we can prove that the political atmosphere is in control of justice. Charlotte Wilson's office has control over who gets prosecuted and who doesn't because of tax dollars, supposedly. The cops don't want to waste tax dollars on a court case that isn't going to go to trial. They always go to the solicitor to see if there is a case or not. It's not the other way around like it should be.
And she said she concluded she supports the sheriff's decision to not bring charges after reviewing the evidence. What other errors are there?
There's a lot of errors. And that statement came out after Rebecca Collette did her story.
Right.
And that's the only reason that statement probably came out. She probably wouldn't even have pushed it anymore. She probably would have left it alone because she's gotten away with it for years. And I'm not saying personally Charlotte Wilson, but the political system has gotten away with it for years of not prosecuting people. I don't have the money to fight. I tried to hire a lawyer. They wanted a ton of money, but then he also looked at me, and he said, which I can't think of the lawyer's name, several of them, and they're like, look, we can spend the money, we can do this, but it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. I don't have thousands of dollars to put, or time to put into something like that.
And Ms. Wilson, let me ask you this, because according to Channel 2, the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office said it was a case of self-defense. She said that's not true. But Watson, as you mentioned, as you are saying now, is actually not buying that narrative. What was the communication between the Sheriff's Office and the solicitor at the time of your son's death and afterwards?
They were covering each other's behinds. Basically, that's what it came down to, and that's why that statement came out, because the detectives were saying their hands were tied and placing the blame towards the solicitor's office. And of course, the solicitor's office like, hey, we don't have that kind of power, even though they do have that power, because the cops will not take the time to investigate, collect evidence, interview people if there is no reason to do so, if it's not going to go to trial. And they were told from the beginning it would not go to trial, that it was a self-defense case.
And I know that apparently that decision was made before all of the shell casings were collected or the autopsy was complete. When
Correct.
did you actually receive that autopsy, Ms. Watson?
It took me a month to get the autopsy. They did not want to give it to me. And I know why. I personally wrote, and I personally went down to the Berkeley Moncks Corner autopsy to get it, because it shows, the evidence in the autopsy puts that the gun was put to his skin. The projectiles of the way that the bullets went into my son's body do not match up with the lady's story at all. Sitting with all of them, I sat down with the coroner,
Right.
I sat down with the assistant coroner and the detective and the advocate rights person in Berkeley County, which was a bunch of hoo-hoo. She didn't do anything at all. And they all try to say, yes, this is a tragic scene, and yes, you're a mother that's grieving. Yes, those are all true statements, but it does not deny the fact that my son was murdered. And I mean murdered. His life was taken. He was shot 5 times, and the police department will not investigate it properly because of the so-called evidence from the husband and wife. That is the only reason why, is because the husband and wife collaborate, not the physical evidence, not the statements from witnesses, not the bullets or the autopsy, any of that. It's a collaboration between a husband and wife that the case is not getting prosecuted or investigated.
And I'm probably asking a redundant question again, but how many statements were actually collected?
The detective did speak to my son's work, the engineering company. They probably, I know at least 10 statements that were done, but there's probably more that could have been done and more investigation. But even with those statements, it collaborated that Dwayne Sweatman, the man that killed my son, had a violent history, and that this wasn't the first time he had threatened people, and it wasn't the first time that a roommate of his had ran from the freaking place afraid for his life. There was proof of that.
And Ms. Watson, okay, how many times did the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office was called out to his property?
In the time that my son was there, twice. And do you know why? Twice times it was, they said it was a drug house, and I'm not denying that there was stuff happening there. I'm not that things. But both times those police reports, when those cops were called out there, they were making music videos. And there was proof of that in the reports. The 2 times the cops came out there in 2017, why my son was at that property, it's why they were making making videos, and they had replicas of guns, and they had real guns that weren't loaded, and they were singing and stuff like that. That was why the cops got called out there twice when my son lived there.
Did they increase the police presence? Oh, yeah, right. Other than, okay.
No. Wow. No.
Wow.
And it wasn't, just the evidence, regardless of what happened there before, or what had happened there a month before, a day before, a week before. If a murder happens, an investigation should happen all the way through. It should be ripped through and done, regardless of the person's income, regardless of the person's record. My son didn't have a record, but if that person had a record, regardless of what has happened, you should investigate to find the truth and not just assume you know what happened.
And I know this might be a silly question, Ms. Watson, but did the landlords have a permit to carry a gun?
No, that is why Dwayne Sweatman would not claim that he killed my son. He said that his wife did it, no, they did not have permits. And in fact, he was a felon. He wasn't supposed to have guns on his property. That's another thing. They could have charged him with something like that, with having possessions of guns on the property, because he wasn't supposed to have guns or drugs or any of that. But they didn't look into any of that. They didn't look for any of that. They just said it was a self-defense case, and that was it.
And what type of clothes were the landlords wearing on the morning of your son's death?
He was wearing just a t-shirt and jeans. Or they were wearing, I guess, just regular clothes. Like I said, there's video of them going to Dunkin' Donuts that morning, and my son buying them donuts and stuff for the kids and them.
And let me ask you this: how long was your son alive before he passed away?
I don't know, but I do know that he was collaring. I know that he bled out in the yard. It wasn't an instant death. So however long it takes for 7 liters of blood to drain out your body is how long my son was alive.
And I know that. Let me ask you this too: what evidence did they make available to you and your private investigators when you guys finally pressed them?
They tried to hide a lot. They redacted I wanted the police report completely, and they fought me on that. It took me months to get the evidence, and it took finally the PI was able to go in because he was an ex-sheriff, like I said,
right,
and go through some of the stuff that I never got to see or held in my hands. He had all that evidence, but he looked at me and he definitely said I had a case. He still, he was like, there is definitely things not lining up. The story does not line up with the evidence whatsoever. It isn't, you can't even think that they line up together because they don't.
Who inside Berkeley County Sheriff's Office wanted to bring up charges but really couldn't?
Nobody that I'm aware of, just me, as far as I know. The detective, I think, felt sorry for me at times, and I honestly think he got reassigned because I honestly called him every single day and left messages, hey, what is going on? Right. Why aren't you doing your job? Why aren't you? Especially after December, when I found out and I had to sit down with them, and I found out that it was a closed case, and basically the only thing that could happen is if somebody came in and confessed to killing him an unself-defense way. That is the only way that the case would change. It broke my heart yet again, because here I was hoping, I had lost so much and I lost my son, that I could get him some justice and his family and friends some justice. But then to tell that wasn't going to happen either. That was a pipe dream. It just, there aren't words to describe it.
And I understand that you went down here to the Charleston County Solicitor's Office to meet with Scarlett, but you said she refused to talk to you.
I protested. I've walked. I waited. They asked me to leave her office. Yeah, she refused to talk to me. She said there was nothing that she could do.
Was that the same case with the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office? Did you get to talk with Dwayne Lewis?
No, I did not speak with him personally, but I did speak with the detectives. But yes, basically the sheriff's department at least sat down with me and tried to feed me comforting stuff that they were doing everything they can while doing nothing at all. So that was that. But again, it was all just political BS being fed to me. That, and it wasn't until I asked and enforced in December, like, hey, what does this mean? Why aren't you just being black and white and telling me the case is closed, the case is open, this is where we're at? Instead, you're feeding my hopes that there is justice that could happen by saying, oh, we're lighting up interviews, we're investigating this, we're taking this lead, and yes, we did that. Why are you doing that? Why were you giving me false hope when they knew that they weren't going to prosecute the case? And why did you allow those people to sell the land and get rid of the land without the investigation being done complete?
Your son died in August of 2017. How soon after did they sell that property?
It was I think it was September, October. I found out in December.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And who owns that property now?
I don't know that. I honestly don't. I know that it was sold. It was Dwight, the guy's father, that owned the land. Okay.
Wow. And did anybody get the chance to talk to his father? The landlord's father?
The PIs tried to get a hold of him in reference to some information. But again, he was told a story that it was a self-defense case, and it is what it is.
What is the PI telling you? What is he telling you that could have been what is the charge that somebody could have been charged with your son's death for?
Murder. My son was unarmed and shot 5 times at a close range.
Have you heard anything from the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office or anything from Charleston County Solicitor's Office?
No, not since the day that I stopped calling them. No, not a word.
Andrea,
I made flyers
yes,
and I
ma'am.
passed them out. I tried to fight, and then
Right.
but
Wow.
no, none of
Wow.
them will admit they even did wrong to this day.
And what do you want people to know about your son?
My son was a wonderful person. He wasn't some drug addict or some bully that was lost or in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was there to help. He was trying to help those children. That couple had 3 babies. My son's car was the one that had the car seats and the Cheerios, and he was taking them to the daycare. My son was somebody who inspired others and looked at somebody and didn't judge them on their appearance or what they've been through, but tried to uplift them to be all they can be and be better, and to be okay if you fall and you fail, but you can get back up and try again. My son was an incredible person, and he still leaves a legacy today where people call and talk to me and tell me how he helped them along the way, whether it was just talking or helped them get off drugs or whatever it was. He's very much missed.
Andrea Watson, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.